Good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're having again a webinar for the standard drafters, and today's webinar will talk about the new internal regulations part 3 of this year, of course, and in particular updating you on the drafting rules, the technical reports, and the simple template updates. So my name is Els, and I will be moderating the webinar in the background as usual. You will be all muted during this webinar, so you don't have the possibility to speak out loud, but I do advise you or invite you to use a Q&A panel for entering your questions. You cannot use a chat function that is disabled for attendees, but please, any question or comment you might have, enter that in the Q&A panel. The presenters will take a look after the presentations. We will also share with you the complete recording of the webinar and the presentation that we're using today. Should you be on Twitter, please feel free to talk about us. We are on Standards for EU, and we have that dedicated hashtag training for standards. So without further ado, I have the pleasure to introduce you today my colleagues Amy and Leah. They are both editors at the editing and production team at Standardization and Digital Solutions here at CEN and CENELEC. So please, ladies, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Els. Good morning, everybody. So today we've got quite a lot of information to give you, so hopefully it's not too much, but we're going to be talking about, first of all, the internal regulations part 3. There's a new edition for 2022, so we'll take you through each of the changes with regards to that and a little explanation about what it means for the drafting. We then have some updates to how you draft technical reports, so we have some new rules that are in place. We will, of course, explain these rules and what they mean for drafting as well. We then have some updates to the CEN and CENELEC simple templates. So we're going to give you a brief overview of the new additions and also an introduction to our new quick start guides that we've drafted. And then, of course, a recap of the drafting rules at the very end. So Leah, over to you.
Thank you, Amy. So we will start with the changes to the internal regulations part 3. As you know, the internal regulations part 3 sets out the principles and rules for the structure and drafting of CEN and CENELEC deliverables. It is based on the ISO IEC directives part 2, but contains modifications relevant to CEN and CENELEC. These modifications are denoted by lines found on the margin of the text. The directives are revised every few years, most recently in 2021, which is the basis for this latest version of IR3, which was published at the start of July. The rules in this revised IR3 will apply to all drafts submitted to us as from the 1st of October, so some of the changes may impact your current work. Most of the changes are editorial improvements. The more impactful changes are listed in the European Forward, and I will go through those today. The IR3 is available on both the CEN BOSS and CENELEC BOSS under the subject reference material. If you wish, you can download those today and scroll through the latest IR3 while I go through the changes from the forward. So the first change in the list in the forward is related to term entry 318, which gives the definition for technical reports. This change involves the addition of a note 2 to entry, which clarifies the permitted content of technical reports. This is a very important change, so Amy will go into more detail on this a bit later on. And for now, I will skip to the next point in the list. So in clause 6, 2 new sections have been added. The first shown here is subclause 6.5. This introduces the notion of supplementary content or file attachments, which can be provided as attachments to a deliverable. This section sets out the rules for these types of materials and how they should be provided, so please do read through it carefully if it applies to you. Note this section has been modified from the ISO IEC directives part 2 6.5 in order to apply to CEN and CENELEC requirements. The next addition in clause 6 is a subclause 6.6 on a subdivision of subject matter into profiles. This sets out certain rules for when it is necessary to organize or subdivide the subject matter and also provides some useful examples. It's pretty self-explanatory. The next change relates to clause 7. As shown here, the wording in 7.1 has been revised to make it clear that the expression of provisions, such as requirements, recommendations, permissions, and possibilities, shall be limited to the verbal forms defined in tables 3 to 7 in clause 7. Now, this clarification is made to ensure that a clear distinction can be made between the different provisions. This is very important as it can help avoid the risk of misinterpretation by the user. It also helps us a great deal when editing your documents, particularly when checking that normative references are listed in clause 2. In addition, in clause 7, the provisions in table 5 for permissions have been revised. The verbal form may not has been deleted as an option for a negative permission, as this wording can be ambiguous. As stated here, the preference in this case is to write what is permitted or to rewrite the negative permission as a negative requirement or recommendation, i.e., this shall not be done instead of this may not be done. Just one example. In clause 8, a new subclause 8.6 was added requiring the use of inclusive terminology in newly drafted documents and also, when possible, in current documents. Some examples on inclusive language are given in the guidance document on the CEN-BOSS called Preparation and Submission of Files. You can also find several examples in the ISO House Style Guide. That brings us to clause 9. Clause 9 was given a general review, so the content here was completely reorganized, but not entirely changed. So I would suggest having a closer look at this section after. But one notable change is the insertion of a subclause 9.2. This gives permission for an alternative representation of numbers and symbols for variable quantities and numerical values for programming languages, pseudocode, and markup languages. In addition, a recommendation was added in 9.3.1, shown here. Note, this also is a change added in the IR3 and not explicitly from the directives. Following discussion. The next change pertains to 3 different sections of IR3. It's in clauses 27 to 29 on formulae, figures, and tables. This item deals with the designation of formulae, figures, and tables in a document. As you know, tables shall be numbered beginning with 1 continuously throughout the document, independent of the numbering of the clauses. The same rule applies to the figures and formulae, and this will remain the default method for numbering. But in this latest version, permission has been given to number these elements in relation to the clauses in which they appear. This option is, however, subject to BT approval. And for those of you that are currently doing this with certain documents following a BT decision, you will continue to need to get BT approval to do this. The last item is for clause 31. And this is the adding of a statement that permits the inclusion of trademarks or trade names for reasons of public interest or public safety. And an additional example 4 has also been added for use as a footnote in these cases. So this is the last of the changes that are from the list in the forward, but I will just mention there are a couple of additional changes that were made in the IR3. The first shown here in clause 10. In 10.4, undated references, a note has been added that refers to harmonized standards, since additional rules apply for normative references in these types of documents. So please be aware of this. We wanted to draw attention to that. And additional information on this can be found on the CENELEC BOSS relating to harmonized standards. And lastly, and also, yes, and in 10.5, dated references, we have added examples for how to list dated published documents that are impacted by standalone amendments or core agenda. There are examples of how to list these correctly in clause 2, as shown here, or in the bibliography, as shown here with a footnote that refers to the amendments or core agenda. And also in 10.5, there's an example of how to cite this in the text, which will include a cross-reference to the footnote. Lastly, in Annex ZA, under the adoption of international standards, Some changes have been made in the rules for common modifications under subclause ZA.3. So please have a look at this section if it pertains to your work. And in ZB.2.1, deviations, the wording under item A has changed to align with B, which was updated in the last IR3. So this will affect some annexes being drafted for A deviations. So if you are working on this, please do take a look at the new wording. That brings us to the end of the main changes.
Okay, so now we've got some changes to technical report drafting, which Leah did introduce just a moment ago. And this is mainly highlighted in clause 3, terms and definitions of the IR part 3. Specifically, as Leah said, term 3.1.8. So the most important thing to note right here is that it's no longer permitted to include requirements, recommendations, or permissions, which is quite a significant change. So it does mean that TRs can only contain statements of fact, meaning they have to be purely informative documents, which, to put it bluntly, means no shall, no should, and no may if we use those tables in clause 7. If you want guidance on what constitutes a normative element, do take a look at those tables in clause 7. They're very comprehensive. They cover every eventuality, and try to stick to those too. Clauses 1, 2, and 3 are still obligatory even if they are empty. And in a majority of cases, clause 2 will be empty with just one exception, and that is where clause 3 pulls any definitions from another deliverable. And this means that deliverable will need to be present in clause 2, and that is the only instance where clause 2 will not be empty. Any other reference deliverables or documents need to go into a bibliography, since they all will be informative. So that's quite important for you to remember. Any normative elements found in the text will be removed by CCMC editors. You will be informed accordingly, but any shall, any should, any may, we will redraft these to be purely statements of fact. And then any normative references that we find, we will put these into a bibliography, just so that you're aware of that. We will let you know that this has happened, and of course we won't proceed until we have your approval. These rules come into effect on the 1st of October 2022, so you have a little under a month to fix anything in any drafts that you're currently working on. Any drafts submitted after this date will be edited accordingly, but anything that we've already received, anything that's currently in the production line today, they will be edited according to the rules that we currently have. So anything after the 1st of October 2022 will be edited according to the new rules. If at any point you're unsure, you want to double check an element, you don't think something's normative, but you're not sure, you can always contact CCMC beforehand. One of the editors will be more than happy to help you out. You can contact production@cenelec.eu, or if you have the contact of an editor directly, you can contact them. So now on to the simple templates. We have some updates and some new elements. So we'll go back to Leah for this.
Okay. For those of you that are not already familiar, the CEN and CENELEC simple templates are flat Word documents that you can download from the CEN or CENELEC boss to draft your deliverables. This is whether it is a new standard or if you're revising an older edition, you can copy and paste into the template. The template contains all of the relevant styles needed for each individual section and will help you to structure your document according to the Internal Regulations Part 3 rules. It also provides the necessary boilerplate text for clauses 2 and 3 and gives examples and guidance on various elements. The templates were recently updated before the summer, so I advise you to download these latest versions as they do contain some useful changes and corrections. And I will quickly show you where to find these in case you haven't. The CEN or CENELEC boss. So here on the CEN boss, as I mentioned earlier, the Internal Regulations Part 3 is found under the reference documents, and the template is found under Forms and Templates, the CEN simple template for drafting standards, and on the CENELEC boss is also here under Technical Work, which is also under Forms and Templates. And it's here, the template. You just have to click. I have it open already, but if you click, I think I have the CEN one open. Okay, this part has mainly remained the same. We just did some small corrections on some of the styles. I've also added some additional styles to the style palette so that we have more examples, and I've gotten rid of ones that are not used. We modified the text here in the forward and added some examples here for different types of documents. In the introduction, we've added the text for if patent rights have been identified during the preparation of the document. This is the text from the guide that you're supposed to include. So we put it here for ease. And if you don't need this part of the text, you can simply delete it. As is true of a lot of the information in the template, it's just there for your reference. And if it's not relevant, it can be deleted here. As you can see, it just has all the different elements, the scope, normative references, and terms. We've added, I think, in this edition, this example here, as I mentioned earlier, for documents that are affected by amendments or core agenda with the footnote. I've added some additional examples for list items in the style palette and also for paragraph numbering for reference. And we've added here an example for codes, for the correct style for codes for your reference. And here I didn't make any big changes, I don't believe, but just to give you a look if you haven't seen it. It brings us, and the CENELEC template is also very similar. It's obviously a different font. Take you back here. So you can use either, as mentioned there. They're interchangeable. So if one doesn't work, as mentioned, you can download the other. The main difference is the font, and the information in the forward will be slightly different, but normally you should be able to download the one needed on the page. Note, it is obligatory to draft deliverables in the template. So not doing so could result in your document being rejected at submission. It doesn't have to be the latest version of the template, but we highly recommend it. As shown here, the templates are easy to use and will help ensure that your document follows the key drafting rules. And it also helps us to avoid having to make dramatic changes to the style and structure of the document during editing. So it's helpful for us. To help with the use of the template, Amy will now inform you about the new Quick Start Guide.
Yes, so one of the things that we've spent some time doing is to make the template easier for you to use is to draft up a quick start guide. So if I can take you back to the boss, the quick start guide is right next to where you download the template from. So this is the CEN boss, and it's there on the CENELEC boss. And it is a downloadable PDF file. So it should open quite nicely. It's very comprehensive. It covers every possible element from the very first moment that you download right the way through until you're ready to submit. It's got plenty of examples, screenshots. It explains absolutely everything that you could possibly need to know about using the template. So really, this should be your first port of call when you download it for the first time. So that is there for you. You can download it and keep it. You can save it. We will maintain this as much as we maintain the templates as well. So you can rest assured that it's always up to date. But if you want some real-time guidance on the templates, we did a webinar last year in December where we download the template and we take you through how to use it. We type into it. It's very, very, very comprehensive. So if you want something a little more interactive, that is there for you. And coming soon, we actually have an updated CEN boss on drafting guidance, and the CENELEC boss is currently being drafted and is subject to approval, hopefully very soon. But just to give you a short taster on what we hope we can do a full webinar on, this information is there for you as well. So you can take a look through this new updated boss content. But we will do a webinar to introduce these, hopefully in the coming months. So now we just have a quick recap on the drafting rules, just to keep it nice and fresh in your mind. So as always, clause 1 is the scope. It is an obligatory element. It cannot be empty. It has to contain only statements of facts, which means no requirements, recommendations, or permissions. Clause 2 is always normative references. It's obligatory even if it's empty, and you need to take the introductory wording from IR3. You have, I believe, 2 different options. You can have one if you have normative references, and there's wording there if it's empty. So please make sure you use the correct one. There are, of course, rules on dated versus undated references, so just make sure that you're using the correct one. And you should only put normatively referenced documents in there Seems a bit arbitrary to say it, but we do get a lot of informative references in there, sorry. They should be normative reference only. Clause 3 is always terms and definitions. It's obligatory element, again, even if empty, and you need to take the correct introductory wording from IR3. Please don't use automatic numbering when you create each term. It causes us endless problems and we have to remove them manually. It's quite a bit of work if you have to do it all manually, but it's one step that you have to do once, basically. We recommend that you do it at the end. Style it correctly, of course, and no soft returns after the term number or the term. Please use hard returns only. One of the benefits of using the simple template with the styles is that it reduces the amount of space between the different elements, and it makes things bold, it makes things unbold, so you can rely on the styles for that. So please don't use any soft returns or automatic numbering. For tables, make sure that they're simply drafted. Merge cells to be avoided where possible, but if you can't avoid them, merge everything at the end once you've finished drafting the table. It's better to use hidden borders, actually, instead of merge cells, but we understand that you can't always avoid them. A number designation is obligatory for each table, so just table 1, table 2, but additional title is optional, so any example that you want to put after that is optional, but the number designation is obligatory. Please don't use nested tables, so that is a table contained within a cell. XML doesn't support these, and they cause us a lot of problems in terms of us having to draft the table around them or try and find them, put them back. It's more hassle than it's worth, so please don't use those. A note on figures, we need to make sure that we have one figure file for each figure, including any figures that you put inside keys or in tables. For CEN, the rules on figures are obligatory, but for CENELEC, they're optional, but strongly recommended. It really does help the editors out if you have the figure files within CENELEC. If you could send those with your draft, it really does help us out. But of course, if you don't have them, it's not so much a problem. Number designation, as with tables, is obligatory, so figure 1, figure 2, but any additional title is optional. Formulae, we recommend, as always, that you use math type. If you don't have that available to you, you can use the built-in tool that's found in Word. Just note that there are a number of problems in terms of conversion that we sometimes have. So if you have a number of formulae across a number of different standards, it's worth investing in math type, for sure. And then finally, we do have quite extensive webinar series that cover these drafting rules, that cover the template use, they really cover everything. The hyperlinks are there for you for CEN and CENELEC. So we do recommend that you take a look at those when you start drafting. And I just wanted to make a note on future tools because we do have some changes that are coming up in the next few months, years, and so on. It will mean that these drafting rules are more important than ever. Because we may find that if you don't follow these drafting rules and we start to use these new tools, your drafts will be rejected more consistently. So make sure that you use the resources that we have created for you. They're created by editors to help you as much as possible, to try and reduce your workload a little bit. So if you want to get in touch with either myself or Leah, you can do. Our emails are on the screen. But also we recommend that for any editing or especially non-editing or procedural matters, you contact production. This is just because sometimes the editor isn't necessarily the editor at the stage that you're at, so it's always better to contact production in any case. So I think we finished just a little bit early, which is good. So we have some questions that we'll take a look at. We'll mute ourselves.